A routine day shattered, Daniel Harper wiped the dust from his visor and checked his readings one more time. The crimson wasteland of Scorpius Prime stretched endlessly before him, its copper-toned dunes rising and falling like frozen waves. 40 years of surveying alien worlds had taught him to respect the unknown, but this harsh desert planet had tested even his patience. The human colony of Meridian Station glittered behind him like a jewel dropped carelessly onto rust-colored sand, its crystalline towers reflecting the orange glow of the setting sun. At 58, Daniel had seen enough strange sights to fill a dozen lifetimes. Floating islands on Cassiopeia, 4. Singing forests on New Terra, crystal caves that hummed with ancient energy on the Outer Rim colonies. But nothing had prepared him for what was about to happen on this ordinary Tuesday. Evening during his final month before retirement, he was finishing his perimeter check when movement caught his eye. Something large was approaching from the eastern dunes, moving fast and with obvious purpose. Daniel's hand instinctively moved toward his emergency beacon, but he did not activate it. Years of experience had taught him to observe before reacting as the figure drew closer. Daniel recognized the distinctive silhouette. A dragon. That is what the colonists called them, though the scientists insisted on using the proper term, Draconis scorpri. These magnificent creatures were native to the planet. Massive winged reptiles with intelligence that shone clearly in their eyes. Most colonists feared them. Daniel had always found them fascinating. An impossible request, this particular dragon was one Daniel recognized immediately. He had spent countless hours observing a mated pair that frequented the crystal formations near the eastern perimeter. The male had scales that shimmered like beaten copper in the sunlight, while his mate possessed scales of deep sapphire blue. Daniel had never mentioned his observations to anyone, knowing his colleagues would think him foolish for his interest in creatures most considered dangerous pests. But this was no casual visit. The copper dragon was moving with frantic energy, his powerful legs churning through the sand, wings folded tight against his body. As he skidded to a stop 20 meters from the perimeter fence, Daniel could see the creature was breathing hard, his sides heaving with exertion. Other colonists had noticed the unusual visitor. Shouts of alarm echoed across the compound. Daniel heard someone calling for security. He raised his hand without looking back. "Wait," he called out firmly. "Something is wrong here." The dragon's enormous head swung toward Daniel and their eyes met. In that moment, Daniel saw something he would never forget. Pain, desperation, and unmistakably hope. The creature took several slow steps forward until only the perimeter markers separated them. Daniel stood his ground, though his heart hammered against his ribs. The dragon lowered his massive head until one golden eye was level with Daniel's face. This close, Daniel could see every detail. The individual scales, each one unique. The vertical pupils that contracted slightly as they focused on him. The intelligence that blazed in those alien eyes. "Understanding beyond words, what do you need?" Daniel whispered, knowing the creature could not answer, but unable to stop himself from asking. The dragon made a low sound, somewhere between a rumble and a whine. Then, with careful deliberation, he reached forward with one massive claw. Daniel flinched, but did not step back. The claw hooked gently in the fabric of his environmental suit, tugged once, released, then tugged again. "Harper, what in blazes are you doing?" The voice belonged to Dr. Patricia Winters, the station's head of xenobiology. She was approaching cautiously, her scanner already active. "That is a fully mature male Draconis. They are unpredictable and extremely territorial." "This one is different," Daniel insisted. "I have been watching this pair for months. They are mates, always together. But I only see him now. Something has happened to her." The dragon released Daniel's suit and took several steps backward. He looked at Daniel expectantly, then turned and took a few more steps away. He looked back again. "He wants me to follow him," Daniel said, the realization hitting him like a physical force. "Absolutely not," Patricia replied sharply. "Security is on the way. We will tranquilize it and relocate it safely." No, the force of Daniel's own objection surprised him. "Look at him, Patricia. Really look. He is not threatening anyone. He is asking for help." Before anyone could stop him, Daniel stepped past the perimeter marker and walked toward the dragon. The massive creature's entire body seemed to relax slightly. He turned and began walking away, glancing back repeatedly to ensure Daniel was following. "Daniel Harper, this is madness," Patricia called after him. "You will get yourself killed." "Track my beacon," Daniel replied, tapping his wrist unit. "If I am not back in 2 hours, send help. But only if I signal you. Promise me, Patricia." After a long moment, he heard her reluctant agreement. 2 hours. Not 1 minute more. Journey into the unknown, the dragon set a challenging pace across the desert. The twin moons of Scorpius Prime provided enough light to see by, and Daniel's suit automatically adjusted to the plummeting nighttime temperatures. They traveled for nearly 40 minutes. Daniel's legs burning with exertion as they climbed dune after dune, his mind raced with possibilities. Was this a trap? Had he completely misread the situation? But something deeper than logic told him he had made the right choice. There was urgency in every movement the dragon made. A desperation that spoke of genuine need. When they crested a particularly high dune, Daniel stopped so abruptly he nearly fell. Below them, sheltered by towering crystal formations that glowed faintly in the moonlight, lay the female dragon. Her sapphire scales, normally brilliant and vibrant, looked dull and lifeless in the pale light. She lay motionless, one wing extended at an awkward angle. The male rushed to her side, making soft sounds Daniel had never heard from the species before. He nudged her head gently with his snout, then turned to look at Daniel. The pleading in those eyes was unmistakable. Daniel activated his communicator. "Patricia, are you receiving?" After a moment of static, her voice came through. "Your signal is clear." "What is happening?" "It is the female. She is down. I need you to guide me through an assessment. You want to examine a Draconis in the field without restraints?" Patricia's voice rose an octave. "Daniel, that is insane." "It is necessary," Daniel replied, moving closer to the fallen dragon. "This male brought me here specifically to help her. I will not betray that trust by waiting for a security team to arrive with weapons." The Discovery Patricia's sigh crackled through the speaker. "Fine. Activate your suit cameras. Let me see what we are dealing with." Daniel approached the female carefully, aware of the male's watchful presence. Up close, her beauty was even more striking. Each scale was a work of art, deep blue with iridescent highlights that shifted as the moonlight touched them. "I need to check her mouth," Daniel said, both to Patricia and to the male dragon. "There appears to be some kind of discharge." With infinite care, Daniel placed his hand on the female's snout. Her skin was burning hot even through his gloves. She did not react to his touch, which worried him deeply. He glanced at the male dragon. "I'm going to open her mouth," he said clearly, maintaining eye contact. "I will not hurt her. I promise." Whether the dragon understood his words or simply his intent, he made no move to interfere as Daniel gently pried open the massive jaws. What he saw inside made his blood run cold. "Patricia, are you seeing this?" Yes, her voice was tight with concern. "There is something lodged in her throat." "Daniel, that looks like debris from a satellite or shuttle." Wedged deep in the female's gullet was a jagged piece of metal, roughly the size of Daniel's forearm. It glinted in the moonlight, and he could see it was cutting into the soft tissue. Iridescent fluid, presumably blood, leaked around its edges. "Ingested it while feeding," Patricia explained. "Draconis consume metallic ores and crystals." She probably could not tell the difference between natural material and artificial debris. "She is choking on it," Daniel realized, horror washing over him. "What do I do?" The silence that followed felt eternal. Finally, Patricia spoke, her voice heavy. "In a proper facility, we would sedate her and perform surgery. But you are in the middle of nowhere with no equipment. Daniel, I do not know if there is anything you can do." Daniel looked at the male dragon, who was watching him with those intelligent, desperate eyes. He looked at the female, her breathing shallow and labored. He thought about the gift of trust these creatures had given him by bringing him here. "I am going to try to remove it," he announced. "Daniel, no. Even weakened, she could kill you with one reflexive movement." "Then I will die trying to help," Daniel replied simply. because that is what you do when someone asks for your help.
Ah!
He turned to face the male dragon directly. Pointing to his own throat, then to the female's open mouth, he made a pulling motion with his hands. The dragon's eyes narrowed. Then, in a moment Daniel would remember for the rest of his life, the creature nodded. One clear, deliberate movement of his massive head. "Did you see that?" Daniel whispered. "I did." Patricia's voice was filled with wonder. That was clear communication. "Daniel, they are not just intelligent. They are sentient." Daniel removed his outer jacket and rolled up his sleeves. His hands were steady, despite his racing heart. He had made his choice. Now he would see it through, whatever the cost. The female dragon's mouth gaped before him like a cavern. Daniel took a deep breath, said a silent prayer to whatever forces governed this strange universe, and reached inside to save a life that had been placed in his hands. A desperate gamble. Daniel's arms disappeared into the dragon's mouth up to his elbows. The heat was overwhelming, even through his protective suit. The smell of alien biology surrounded him, strange and acrid. His fingers found the jagged metal object and wrapped around its edges carefully. "I have it," he reported, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "But it is embedded deep. I can feel it caught in the tissue." "Try rotating it gently," Patricia instructed through the communicator. "Very gently, Daniel. If you tear anything major, she could bleed out in minutes." Daniel adjusted his grip and began to twist the debris slowly. He felt resistance, then suddenly something gave way. A fresh surge of the glowing fluid poured over his hands, hot and slippery. The female's entire body convulsed. "I am making it worse," Daniel said, panic creeping into his voice for the first time. The male dragon suddenly moved, and Daniel's heart stopped. But instead of attacking, the massive creature lowered his head next to Daniel and used his own snout to stabilize his mate's head, holding her steady. "Incredible," Patricia breathed through the speaker. "He understands what you are trying to do. He is helping you." Emboldened by this show of trust, Daniel gripped the metal piece more firmly and continued the careful twisting motion. He could feel it loosening, pulling free from the tissue bit by bit. With one final, gentle tug, the debris came free. Daniel yanked his arms back just as the female's jaws snapped shut reflexively. She coughed, violently. A sound like rolling thunder. More of the luminous fluid splattered onto the sand, glowing faintly in the darkness. Daniel stumbled backward, giving the dragon space, his arms covered in the strange blood that was already beginning to cool on his suit. The miracle of life for several long moments. Nothing happened. The female lay still, her breathing barely visible. The male pressed close to her, making soft, keening sounds that tore at Daniel's heart. Had he been too late? Had removing the debris caused too much damage? Then, like watching the sunrise, the female's eyes opened. They were the color of Arctic ice, pale blue and luminous. She blinked slowly, confusion evident in her gaze. Her head lifted from the sand, moving carefully as if testing her own body. Her eyes found Daniel. He felt the full weight of her intelligence studying him. There was awareness in that gaze, understanding, and something that looked remarkably like gratitude. She struggled to her feet, the male supporting her weight with his own body. Once steady, she lowered her enormous head until her face was level with Daniel's. "Hello," Daniel said softly, feeling tears prick at his eyes. "You are going to be okay now." The female made a gentle rumbling sound. Then she extended her long, forked tongue and touched Daniel's outstretched hand. The sensation was like a mild electrical current, warm and somehow comforting. "Patricia, she is thanking me," Daniel reported, his voice thick with emotion. "I can feel it. She is actually thanking me." "This is unprecedented," Patricia replied, and Daniel could hear the excitement mixed with awe in her tone. "We have never documented this level of interaction. Daniel, you have just proven these creatures are fully sentient. Do you understand what this means?" The male dragon moved suddenly, drawing Daniel's attention. Using one massive claw with surprising delicacy, the creature began drawing in the sand. Daniel watched in amazement as clear, deliberate lines appeared. When the dragon stepped back, Daniel could see what he had created. A message in the sand. The drawing was simple but unmistakable. Two large dragon figures stood on either side of a smaller figure that could only represent a human. Around all three, the dragon had drawn a circle. "Are you seeing this?" Daniel whispered into his communicator. "Yes." Patricia's voice was hushed with reverence. "They are not just sentient. They have symbolic thinking, abstract reasoning. This changes everything we thought we knew about non-human intelligence." The female had recovered enough strength to approach the drawing. She studied it for a moment, then added her own mark. She drew what looked like a small egg shape between the three figures, before Daniel could process what this might mean. Both dragons lifted their heads in unison, turning toward the distant mountains. They seemed to hear something beyond human perception. The male looked back at Daniel and made a soft sound, almost apologetic. "I think they need to leave," Daniel told Patricia. "They have stayed as long as they dare." "Wait," Patricia protested. "This is the most important xenobiological discovery in human history. We need to bring them in for proper study, run tests, establish communication protocols." "No." Daniel's voice was firm. "They are not test subjects, Patricia. They are people. Different from us, yes, but people nonetheless. They trusted me with their lives. I will not betray that by treating them like laboratory specimens." The silence that followed was long. Finally, Patricia sighed. "You were right. I apologize. Scientific curiosity made me forget basic ethics. But Daniel, we need to document this properly. The implications for our entire colonization program are staggering." "I know," Daniel agreed. "And I will help you with that. But right now, these two need to go home." An unexpected gift. Both dragons turned to face Daniel one final time. The female lowered her head and made a sound unlike anything Daniel had heard before. Musical and somehow filled with meaning he could almost grasp. Then, with breathtaking grace, both creatures spread their wings. The sight stole Daniel's breath. Their wingspans had to be 15 meters each. The membranes thin enough to let the moonlight shine through, creating patterns of shadow and light on the sand. With powerful downward strokes that kicked up swirling clouds of red dust, they lifted into the air. They circled once above Daniel's head. The male dipped one wing in what seemed unmistakably like a salute. Then they turned toward the mountains and flew away, their silhouettes growing smaller against the star-filled sky until they disappeared completely. Daniel stood, watching long after they vanished, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. He had connected with an alien intelligence in a way few humans ever would. He had been trusted, tested, and found worthy of that trust. As he turned to begin the long walk back to Meridian Station, something caught his eye. A glint in the sand where the female had been lying. Daniel approached carefully and knelt down, brushing away the copper-colored soil. His breath caught in his throat. Nestled in a shallow depression was an oval object about the size of his palm. It was smooth and warm to the touch, the same iridescent blue as the female dragon's scales. Even in the dim moonlight, he could see faint patterns swirling across its surface. "Patricia," he said quietly. "They left an egg." The communicator erupted with noise. "What are you certain?" "Daniel, bring it in immediately. This is beyond incredible." Daniel carefully lifted the egg, cradling it in both hands. It pulsed with warmth, and he could swear he felt a faint heartbeat within. "I do not think they forgot it," he said slowly, understanding dawning on him. "I think this was intentional. Patricia, I think they gave me a gift. New beginning." The walk back to Meridian Station felt surreal. Daniel held the egg carefully, wrapped in his jacket for protection and warmth. His mind spun with the implications of what had happened. By the time he reached the perimeter, a crowd had gathered. Patricia stood at the front, her face alight with barely contained excitement. "Let me see," she said, reaching for the bundle. Daniel stepped back instinctively. "Carefully, this is not a specimen. This is a child." Patricia's expression softened. "Of course. You are right. But Daniel, we need to get it to the lab immediately. We have to create a proper incubation environment." "The temperature requirements alone, I will be caring for it," Daniel interrupted. Patricia stared at him. "You? But you are not a xenobiologist." You do not have the training or the equipment, but I have the trust of its parents, Daniel replied simply. That matters more than equipment. Over the next several weeks, Daniel's living quarters transformed into something between a home and a research facility. The egg required specific conditions, higher temperatures than humans found comfortable, exposure to certain light wavelengths that mimicked the crystalline formations where dragons built their nests. Daniel worked closely with Patricia, who had become protective of the egg despite her initial scientific detachment. I've been analyzing the footage from your encounter, Patricia told him one evening as they both monitored the egg's incubation chamber. The drawing in the sand, the deliberate communication, the gift of the egg. Daniel, we have been on Scorpius Prime for 7 years and completely misunderstood its dominant species. I do not think we misunderstood, Daniel said thoughtfully. I think they were hiding, watching us, evaluating us, and you passed their test, Patricia said with a small smile. Daniel shrugged. Or maybe they were desperate enough to risk trusting a human. Either way, it worked. The egg had grown noticeably larger over the weeks, its shell becoming more translucent. Daniel could sometimes see movement inside, shadows shifting beneath the iridescent surface. According to Patricia's calculations, hatching was imminent. The hatching had happened at dawn 3 days later. Daniel woke to a soft tapping sound. He rolled over to see the incubation chambers alert, lights flashing gently. The egg was moving, rocking slightly in its nest of thermal blankets. A crack appeared along one side. Daniel hurried to the chamber and carefully lifted the egg, placing it on the specially prepared hatching nest. He had debated calling Patricia, but decided against it. This moment felt sacred, private. He would document it, but he would experience it alone. The tapping grew more insistent. The crack widened, spreading across the egg's surface in a beautiful web of fractures. A tiny claw pushed through, its scales shimmering with both copper and sapphire hues, perfect blend of both parents. Daniel watched in wonder as the hatchling struggled free. He resisted the urge to help, knowing the effort was important for the creature's development. Piece by piece, the shell fell away until a small dragon emerged. Blinking enormous opalescent eyes at the world, it was beautiful. About the size of a house cat with delicate wings, still damp from the egg fluid. Its long neck held high as it surveyed its surroundings with clear curiosity. When those eyes landed on Daniel, the hatchling made a soft chirping sound and took a wobbling step toward him. Hello, little one, Daniel whispered, extending his hand but not touching. Welcome to the world. The hatchling sniffed his fingers carefully. Then, to Daniel's amazement and delight, it climbed onto his palm, curling its tail around his wrist for balance. It weighed almost nothing, its bones hollow in preparation for future flight. Daniel felt emotion overwhelm him. He had expected to feel responsible for this creature, but he had not anticipated the surge of pure affection that washed over him as the tiny dragon settled trustingly in his hands. You need a name, he told it, gently stroking its spine with one finger. The hatchling arched into the touch. How about Phoenix? For rising from the ashes of what we thought we knew? The hatchling chirped again, sound Daniel chose to interpret as approval. Growing understanding, Phoenix grew with astonishing speed. Within 2 months, the young dragon had graduated from riding on Daniel's shoulder to requiring a specialized habitat attached to his quarters. The creature showed remarkable intelligence, quickly learning to communicate needs through a combination of sounds, gestures, and increasingly sophisticated drawings. Patricia visited daily, documenting every stage of Phoenix's development with scientific rigor, tempered by genuine affection. She had become as protective of the young dragon as Daniel himself. Phoenix is imprinted on you, Patricia explained one afternoon. Watching the dragon follow Daniel around the habitat like a devoted puppy, in the creature's mind, you are family. This was what Daniel had been dreading. But the real family is out there, he said, gesturing toward the mountains visible through the habitat's transparent ceiling. Eventually, Phoenix will need to join them. What? Patricia was quiet for a moment. Perhaps. Or perhaps Phoenix will become something new, a bridge between our species. The first of a generation that grows up knowing humans as friends rather than invaders. Her words proved prophetic. News of Phoenix spread throughout Meridian Station and beyond. Attitudes toward dragons began shifting dramatically. Colonists who had once feared the creatures now viewed them with curiosity and respect. Children pressed against the habitat windows, watching Phoenix with wonder. Artists created sculptures and paintings, inspired by the young dragon's grace. Political transformation, the administrative response was equally dramatic. Jerome Banks, the settlement's director, called an emergency council meeting. Daniel attended reluctantly, with Phoenix insisting on accompanying him. The young dragon had become remarkably attuned to Daniel's emotions and refused to be separated when he was stressed. "Mr. Harper," Banks began, his weathered face serious, "your actions have created a situation that requires immediate policy changes. We can no longer treat the Draconis population as simple wildlife." "I could have told you that months ago," Daniel replied dryly. Banks had the grace to look embarrassed. "Yes, well, we are taking steps to rectify our previous short-sightedness. First, all Draconis hunting permits are immediately revoked. Second, we are establishing protected zones around known nesting areas. Third, and most importantly, we are creating a new department dedicated to Draconis' relations." He paused meaningfully. "We would like you to head it." Daniel blinked in surprise. "Me? I am just a surveyor who happened to be in the right place at the right time." "You are the only human who has earned the trust of the Draconis," Patricia interjected. She was sitting across the council table, looking pleased. "That is not luck, Daniel. That is something special." Phoenix, sensing Daniel's uncertainty, made a soft, encouraging sound and nuzzled his hand. The gesture was not lost on the council members. "I will consider it," Daniel said finally. "But any position I take comes with conditions. We do not study the dragons like specimens. We learn to communicate with them as equals. We respect their intelligence and their rights to this planet, which was theirs long before we arrived." Banks nodded immediately. "Agreed. In fact, that will be written into the department's charter." First contact, the real test, came 6 months after Phoenix's hatching. The young dragon had grown to the size of a large horse, scales gleaming brilliantly in the sunlight. Flight muscles had developed fully. Phoenix could now soar for hours across the desert, always returning to Daniel at day's end. It was during one of these flights that everything changed. Daniel was in the New Relations Department office when his communicator chimed urgently. Patricia's voice came through, breathless with excitement. "Daniel, get to the eastern perimeter immediately. You need to see this." He arrived to find a crowd gathered, all staring at the sky. Phoenix was there, circling above the settlement. But the young dragon was not alone. 2 larger dragons flew alongside, their copper and sapphire scales unmistakable, even at a distance. "The parents," Daniel breathed. The 3 dragons descended together, landing gracefully on the sand beyond the perimeter. Phoenix immediately rushed to the larger dragons, making excited chirping sounds. The copper male and sapphire female examined their offspring carefully, making soft, rumbling sounds that were clearly affectionate. Then, together, all 3 dragons turned to look at Daniel. The meeting of worlds, Daniel walked forward slowly, acutely aware that this moment would define the future of human-dragon relations. Behind him, he heard Jerome Banks issuing quiet orders. "No weapons. Everyone stays calm. This is a peaceful contact." When Daniel reached the perimeter markers, he stopped. It felt important to show respect by not assuming he was welcome beyond the boundary. Phoenix solved the dilemma by trotting over and gently tugging Daniel's sleeve with a small claw. Pulling him forward, the young dragon led Daniel to stand before the parents. Up close, Daniel could see they looked healthy, vibrant. The female's eyes held that same intelligent awareness he remembered. The male's posture was relaxed, not threatening. "Thank you," Daniel said simply, knowing they could not understand his words, but hoping his tone would convey his meaning. "Thank you for trusting me with your child." The female dragon lowered her head and touched her snout gently to Daniel's chest, right over his heart. It was clearly a gesture of significance. The male did the same. Phoenix chirped happily. bouncing between his birth parents and Daniel, like a child wanting his family to get along. Then something extraordinary happened. The male dragon began drawing in the sand again, but this time the image was far more complex. He drew the settlement, recognizable by its distinctive towers. He drew the mountains where the dragons lived. In between them, he drew multiple figures, both human and dragon, standing together. Coexistence, Patricia whispered from behind Daniel. He is proposing peaceful coexistence. Daniel knelt in the sand. Using a stick, he added to the drawing, creating more details. Shared spaces. Dragons and humans working together? A future neither species could achieve alone. When he finished, he looked up at the copper dragon. The dragon studied the drawing for a long moment. Then he looked at Daniel and nodded, just as he had that first desperate night in the desert. Agreement, acceptance, hope. A new era. The weeks that followed were chaotic, exciting, and occasionally terrifying. The Dragon Elders, a council of the oldest and wisest of their species, began making regular visits to Meridian Station. Communication remained challenging, but progress happened daily. Dragons and humans learned each other's body language, developed shared symbols. Found common ground. Phoenix became an official ambassador, translating between the two species in ways that went beyond language. The young dragon understood both human and dragon perspectives, explaining nuances that neither side would have grasped alone. Patricia's xenobiology department transformed into something entirely new, bringing in linguists, anthropologists, and diplomats. They documented everything, creating the foundation for true understanding between species. Not everyone was happy with the changes. Some colonists remained fearful. Some dragons remained suspicious. But slowly, steadily, barriers broke down. Human children played near dragon hatchlings under careful supervision. Dragon craftspeople began trading intricate crystal work for human technology. Hunting zones became off-limits by mutual agreement. Shared festivals celebrated both human and dragon cultures. Coming home 1 year after that first desperate night, Daniel stood on the same perimeter where everything had begun. Phoenix stood beside him, now fully grown and magnificent. The young dragon would always be smaller than pure-blood dragons, a unique hybrid of human-influenced development and natural dragon growth. But that made Phoenix special, not lesser. The copper and sapphire dragons approached from the mountains, gliding down to land near their offspring. They came regularly now, comfortable in the presence of humans. Daniel had learned their true names through Phoenix, sounds he could not quite pronounce but understood in his heart. They were family now in the way that transcended species. "Will you go with them?" Daniel asked Phoenix quietly, knowing the dragon understood. "To live in the mountains with your birth parents?" Phoenix made a sound that Daniel had learned meant no, but also something more complex. The young dragon drew in the sand. To homes. The mountains and the settlement. 2 families. Dragon parents and Daniel. Both, Daniel translated, smiling through the tears that suddenly blurred his vision. "You choose both." Phoenix chirped agreement and nuzzled Daniel's hand. The young dragon would spend time in the mountains, learning dragon culture and traditions. But Phoenix would also return to the settlement, teaching humans and continuing the bridge between worlds. It was not the ending. Daniel had expected that night when he followed a desperate dragon into the desert, but it was better. It was not about one species saving another. It was about 2 species learning they could build something neither could create alone. The copper dragon began drawing in the sand again. This time, he created an image that took Daniel's breath away. Humans and dragons, not just coexisting but thriving together. Cities that blended both architectures. Families that included both species. A future of cooperation, understanding, and shared wonder. Daniel knelt and added his own contribution to the drawing. A small figure that was neither human nor dragon, but something new. Phoenix and all the bridges that would follow. A generation that would grow up knowing unity was not just possible but natural. The promised Patricia joined Daniel at the perimeter, along with Jerome Banks and several council members. Behind them, dozens of colonists gathered, watching the dragons with interest rather than fear. This was the new normal. This was the future they were building together. In all my years studying alien life, Patricia said softly, I never imagined anything like this. That is because you were looking for specimens, Daniel replied gently. Not people. The sapphire dragon approached and carefully picked up something she had been carrying. It was another egg similar to the one that had become Phoenix. She placed it gently in the sand before Patricia. Patricia's eyes went wide. Is she offering this to me? I think she is saying there should be more bridges, Daniel said. More Phoenix-like ambassadors, raised by humans who will love them and teach them about our world. While their dragon parents teach them about theirs, Patricia knelt, tears streaming down her face as she carefully accepted the precious gift. I promise, she whispered to the dragon. I promise I will honor this trust. Other dragons began appearing from the mountains, each carrying an egg. They approached different humans, selecting carefully, placing their most precious gifts into human hands. Not all the colonists accepted. Some were not ready. But enough did, enough to change everything. Tomorrow's dawn as the sun set over Scorpius Prime, painting the desert in shades of copper and gold. Daniel Harper stood surrounded by dragons and humans together. Phoenix stood proudly at his side, a living symbol of what love and trust could achieve, cross impossible divides. The copper dragon drew one final image in the sand. A sunrise, with both humans and dragons standing together to greet it. Tomorrow, the drawing seemed to say, this is just the beginning. Daniel placed his hand on Phoenix's warm scales and looked at the future taking shape around him. He had come to this planet expecting to finish his career in lonely isolation. Instead, he had found family, purpose, and proof that intelligence and compassion existed throughout the universe in forms humans were only beginning to understand. Yes, Daniel said softly, responding to the drawing in the sand. Tomorrow, together. Phoenix spread magnificent wings and roared, a sound of pure joy that echoed across the desert. The other dragons joined in, creating a symphony of hope. And in that moment, under the alien sky of a distant world, two species that had once feared each other took their first true steps toward a shared destiny. The story of Daniel Harper and Phoenix was just beginning, but it was also the story of every human and dragon who would follow. A story of trust, given and earned, of fear overcome by understanding, of love that transcended the boundaries of species and showed that family, true family, was defined not by biology, but by the bonds we choose to forge. As darkness fell and the twin moons rose over Meridian Station, the settlement's lights mingled with the gentle glow of dragon bioluminescence from the mountains. Two lights becoming one. Two peoples learning to walk together toward a future neither could have imagined alone. And in the center of it all, a young dragon named Phoenix chirped softly, content in the knowledge that home was not one place or the other, but wherever love existed between beings brave enough to reach across the void and touch each other's hearts.